Breaking away from the flow of common sense, censor stumina, France has made a declaration that scratches Israel, announcing that it will officially recognize Palestine as a state. You might find this surprising, but this is the first time a G7 country has done this. This could potentially reignite the entire Middle East. Let's take a closer look at this issue and get right into it. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has announced plans to officially recognize Palestine as an independent state. For the first time, a G7 nation has openly backed Palestinian independence, causing significant international diplomatic uproar. On July 24th, President Macron declared on social media that France acknowledges Palestine's statehood in line with its historical duty to promote just and lasting peace in the Middle East. He stated that he will officially declare this at the United Nations General Assembly in September, and emphasized that the most urgent task right now is to stop the tragedy in Gaza and save civilian lives, openly expressing his critical view toward Israel. The French presidential office told cable news network that France won't be alone in recognizing Palestine as a state in September. France will likely lead more European countries in recognizing Palestine as a state. Spain, Ireland, and Norway currently recognize Palestine as a state in Europe. With France joining, it seems more European countries will follow suit. The most likely candidate seems to be the United Kingdom. France's recognition of Palestine as a state is expected to provide greater momentum to the movement for recognizing Palestine, which until now has been led by relatively less powerful countries. Currently, at least 142 of the 193 United Nations member states have recognized or intend to recognize Palestine as a state. However, most major Western countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, South Korea, and Australia, still do not recognize Palestine as a state. France's stance suggests many forthcoming changes. Palestine has expressed a welcoming attitude toward France's declaration of recognizing it as a state. The Palestinian Authority announced that France has made a decision supporting international law and the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Hamas also stated that this is a positive step supporting Palestinian rights. The Saudi Arabian Ministry of Foreign Affairs praised the historic decision, stating it reaffirms the international community's consensus on the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and an independent state. In contrast, Israel has reacted very intensely. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu harshly criticized France, claiming the move rewards terrorism and could help Palestine destroy Israel. Israel's Defense Minister Katz also harshly criticized France, saying that this move is a shameful surrender to terrorism. Other Israeli officials also said that recognizing a Palestinian state could ultimately legitimize armed groups like Hamas, and they assessed that this move is a decision that undermines stability in the Middle East. Israeli media and politicians have widely criticized France's announcement, with some calling it the day Europe rewarded terrorism. This is not the first time France has moved to recognize Palestine as a state. President Macron has recently expressed his support for recognizing Palestine as a state, emphasizing the two-state solution where Israel and Palestine coexist as sovereign nations. France initially planned a June United Nations conference with Saudi Arabia to support the two-state solution. The United States pressured France, and due to the Iran-Israel war, the conference was postponed. The conference was rescheduled as a ministerial-level event for July 28th to July 29th. France is expected to once again state its intention to recognize Palestine as a state on July 28th and 29th. It is expected to put more pressure on Israel. France's recent decision also shows that the international community's patience has reached its limit as the war in Gaza drags on and the horrors continue. The war began due to Hamas's terrorism, but the international community believes Israel's military actions have been excessive. In Gaza, hundreds of Palestinian residents continue to die while attempting to obtain food. Also, the Israeli military has sometimes mistaken Palestinian residents for rioters and opened fire. The United Nations has stated that 1 in 5 children in Gaza is malnourished, and that food distribution must begin immediately. I'm not saying that I support Palestine or that I support Israel. Currently, anti-Israel sentiment in Europe is at its peak. The Israeli military even fired on Palestinian civilians who came to get relief food, causing sentiment to peak. Port workers' unions in Belgium and Italy have refused to load weapons for Israel, while Barcelona City, Spain, has severed all ties with Israel, including its sister city partnership. In that situation, what came next was France's recognition of the state of Palestine. International political experts view France's official recognition of Palestine as a strategic diplomatic move, carefully calculated with its United States relationship in mind, rather than just a humanitarian declaration. In particular, France has long sought strategic autonomy on the international stage, trying to step out of the shadow of the United States, and has consistently shown a desire to establish its own independent diplomatic path within Europe. President Macron has repeatedly stressed that Europe should not be too reliant on the United States, a stance reflected in this decision. France's declaration can be viewed as an independent move that breaks the G7 countries' existing stance and shakes up the diplomatic landscape at the European level. In particular, the United States has maintained its traditional strong support for Israel, but France has made its diplomatic distance from the United States clear by choosing the exact opposite stance. This is mainly due to recent dissatisfaction with the Donald Trump administration's Middle East policy. President Trump has consistently supported Israel despite international criticism for his apparent indifference to the Gaza Strip's humanitarian crisis. President Macron has consistently raised concerns about this American attitude, and through this declaration, he has clearly sent a message that Europe needs its own independent solution to the Middle East issue. In other words, by recognizing the Palestinian state, France has boldly shown that the United States is no longer the sole arbiter of international order. France's independent approach is not new. France has recently highlighted its independence by disagreeing with the United States on issues like the Ukraine war, NATO's role, and economic ties with China. In 2023, President Macron stressed the importance of Europe being able to take responsibility for its own destiny, highlighting the need for Europe's military autonomy and strategic independence. This aligns with the movement within Europe to push for the concept of security without the United States. Additionally, the French public supports this declaration. This is due to the spread of anti-Israel sentiment across Europe and the significant rise in sympathy and support for Palestine. France has the largest Muslim population in Europe, so it is inevitably sensitive to Middle Eastern issues in its domestic politics. Emmanuel Macron appears to be leveraging public sentiment to simultaneously pursue diplomatic and domestic political objectives. Ultimately, France's recognition of Palestine is not merely about human rights, but a resolute effort to break free from United States influence and establish itself as a major diplomatic force in Europe. At the same time, it also serves as a signal to the world that Europe can offer its own independent solutions to the situation in the Middle East. France has taken a firm stance, demonstrating its readiness to accept a cooling of ties with the United States. Diplomatic tensions between the United States and France are likely to intensify around the upcoming United Nations General Assembly. Predictions suggest that if the United States keeps pressuring allies to maintain a unified voice, a movement led by France toward distancing from the United States in European diplomacy could intensify. France's recent declaration holds diplomatic significance beyond a simple news story, potentially marking the beginning of a realignment in international affairs. We should also take a look at the situation in other countries. With France set to recognize Palestine as a state at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly in September, pressure mounts on the United Kingdom to follow suit. On July 25th, around 100 British MPs from both ruling and opposition parties sent an open letter to Prime Minister Keir Starmer, pressing him to recognize Palestine as a state. In early July, around 50 Labour MPs sent a letter to Foreign Secretary David Lammy, pressing for the immediate recognition of Palestine as a state. The United Kingdom seems to be progressing towards acknowledging Palestine's statehood. On July 25th, Germany said recognizing Palestine as a state is a final step in the two-state solution, and it doesn't plan to do so in the near future. The German government also issued a press release that day, maintaining that a negotiated two-state solution is the only way to achieve lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. In fact, Germany also views Israel very negatively. The German government declared that an immediate ceasefire and addressing Gaza's humanitarian situation are top priorities and is ready to increase pressure if no progress is made. They also said that their position is aligned with France and the United Kingdom regarding measures to end the suffering of civilians, and that this remains valid despite differing views on when to recognize Palestine as a state. Germany apparently plans to recognize Palestine as a state eventually. What are your thoughts on France recognizing Palestine as a state? Share in the comments below. Thanks for watching.